Welcome to the Derek Loudermilk Show. This is episode 329 with Arjuna Ardagh. Today's guest, Arjuna Ardagh, is the author of Radical Brilliance, and he's really the perfect guest for this show. For a long time, the show's tagline was how to do something that's never been done before. And that's what his work has done. Basically, has charted out his own concept of the cycles of how and why people have original ideas that change the world. This is actually his ninth book. He's written 9 books. He's also trained more than 2,000 coaches over the last 25 years. He's also a fantastic speaker. He's spoken at United Nations and Google for the last few decades all around the world. So he has the experience to back it up. And today we're going to learn in depth about the cycle of radical brilliance and where people get stuck. Because there are a lot of stuck people. There are a lot of people who are not fully embracing creativity. Partly that's society. So we talk about our society, we talk about sovereignty, we talk about power imbalance, we talk about adult relationships, but largely we keep coming back to exploring this framework of radical brilliance and how you can have radically brilliant ideas and bring something totally new into the world. And Arjuna is also just a really interesting person. So he shares some stories about when he was friends with Eckhart Tolle and Byron Katie before they were ever famous. And he shares about how he mistranslated or misquoted Albert Einstein and it became this meme. And that was an accident in one of the earlier books that he published. So if you're the type of person that really wants to contribute something to the world, or if you're the type of person that's seeking, what is my purpose? How do I fit in this picture? What is my dharma? Then I think you're really going to love this conversation with Arjuna Ardagh. Arjuna Ardagh, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited. Can't wait, Derek.
All right. And we're going to talk about radical brilliance. And this is a topic that I'm really interested in, really passionate about, how brand new things come into the world. And, that's a big part of this concept you've developed, this book you've written. And I'd love to just start with how you got into this. How did radical brilliance come to you?
Great. Thank you. Well, so actually it was a car accident. I was driving a rental car in Washington State, and I had picked out a very cheap rental car because it was just me and my little bag, so I didn't need a massive tank, So I just chose one of these tiny little toy cars, basically, and I had an accident. Later, when I observed the car from the outside, after the accident, it looked like a crumpled piece of paper. It looked like you take a piece of paper and crumple it up. But miraculously, perhaps this was a tribute to the engineering of the car, I walked away without any broken bones. There was blood, but no actual broken bones. But somehow I did hit my head. In fact, I was knocked unconscious for about 10 seconds while the car was still moving. Actually, I was after the impact, I was knocked unconscious. So goodness knows how I survived. So basically, after that accident, I had no broken bones, but I had some brain injury. Like my brain was bruised, and people who understand that were able to tell me that there was some concussion to the brain. So what happened is it put me into a state of PTSD. Like I got home and then the PTSD really set in. And although I was doing EMDR and these different techniques for trauma, I couldn't leave the dark room for about 3 months. I just had to stay in a darkened room, in recovery. It was a brain injury. So during this time, there was a massive silver lining to the cloud, because it was time for self-reflection. At that point, I had been running a coaching school for about 20 years. And I had trained 2,000 coaches, and I had 23 employees. So this is a big thing. And you have an organization that size, as you may know from your own experience or talking to other people, when you're running a big organization, it really becomes like you become a slave to it,
Mm-hmm.
So there I was laying in a dark room. And then one day, after a while, I kind of woke up and I walked over and looked out of the window. And I realized that I had this realization that the things I thought I had to do, I really didn't have to do them, because it was a miracle I had survived the accident, you see? I mean, It was illogical that I had survived an accident that had destroyed a car completely. How come I was still alive? Maybe I'm not still alive. Maybe this is a simulation in the bardo. Could be. But what I realized is, if I had died, none of these obligations would be real anymore. If I had died, I wouldn't have a coaching school to look after. If I had died, none of my obligations would seem real. So consequently, I could imagine that life would have carried on. So this kind of freed up a new direction in life. It was like I was close to 60 at that time, and it freed up, I was like 58, and it freed up like a new birth. And it initiated this question about what is a really genuine good use of a human life, right? What is the way that we can live this life, particularly at this pivotal time where so much is out of balance in the world? What is an intelligent use of a human life where there is really zero distraction and 100% dedication to the things that you will never regret? Okay. So what happened is, Derek, I got into a process of reverse engineering. I had all day just to lay in the bed, so I could kind of think,
Mm-hmm.
And I think before we went online, I mentioned to you that I've done a lot of interviews in my life. Most of them were interviews for books. They were not. I didn't publish them on a podcast. They were just private interviews. So I've done tons of interviews, and by doing all these interviews, I've been able to converse with people who were incredibly passionate about making a difference. I think the first recorded interview I ever did was with Eckhart Tolle. And it was before anyone knew who Eckhart Tolle was. And then soon after, I did Byron Katie. And, then I started off with more people who were really talking about those kind of things, like Jack Cornfield of Spirit Rock. But then it built up into members of Congress. I interviewed Alan Ball, who was the director of American Beauty. I've became close friends with Leonard Cohen, did a lot of interviews with him before he died. Barbara Marx Hubbard. So I've done tons of interviews with people who are on fire, people who are really on fire. And I started to do some reverse engineering. What is it that makes people incredibly fulfilled? What is it that allows people to be just pumping mojo into their mid-80s till the day they drop dead? And so I had to review, first of all, some of the common narratives about what it is that creates a meaningful life, because there are shared narratives that we have about that. Okay.
Yes.
So one shared narrative is, well, I'd say the most common shared narrative in our American society is that it's to do with success, right? If you just make enough money, get enough Facebook followers, pump your book up to #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, whether you do it through honest or dishonest means, if you just do whatever you can to be successful in the way it's been defined, that's a well-lived life. I think by now, Martin Seligman at the Center for Positive Psychology and others have kind of completely disproven that myth, that people who are successful in those ways generally are also very anxious and unfulfilled. That there's much more of a correlation with money to anxiety and depression than there is to fulfillment, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. Yep. It actually goes on a bell curve, which we could come back and talk about. So another common narrative has to do with creativity. If you just like write the most amazing book, like just give your best creative work. And that has some credibility to it. But as you probably know, a lot of artists and writers and musicians are very unhappy. And in fact, there's a fairly substantial suicide rate among artists. So that doesn't seem to be the key either. And we could keep going. You know, another popular myth is the kind of psychotherapy myth that if you spend your life unraveling trauma and doing psychotherapy and going to therapy groups and other groups, you know, and Fisher-Hoffman process, and then you get Rolfed. If you do all these things to release the pain, then you will be ultimately happy. But unfortunately, that can also become a kind of hamster wheel where there's always one more neurosis to unravel. Mm-hmm. We could keep going. Then there's also the true love myth. If you just find your soulmate, then you'll be happy. And finally, there is a myth around enlightenment, which is a very hypnotic, a very seductive myth that if you just get on a spiritual path and meditate your ass off and do yoga and maybe ayahuasca and whatever, you will eventually reach enlightenment and then game over and you ascend. But if you look at people who dedicate their lives passionately to spirituality and going to spiritual meetings and reading spiritual books, that also doesn't have a really good success rate, right? In other words, for the people interested in spirituality, who talk about spirituality and think about spirituality, a lot of people also get caught in a treadmill. So conversely, there are a lot of people in the world who are incredibly fulfilled. People like Lindquist and Alex Ebert, Daniel Schmachtenberger. I've met a lot of people who are super fulfilled, you know, who wake up every morning excited. They are spontaneously in good health. They have good relationships without trying to. Money flows without it being an obsession. They live simply. They live in gratitude. So I started to do some reverse engineering about what is the underlying precondition that leads to fulfillment and a life of no regret. And I made. Go ahead.
Can I jump in there?
Yes, of course.
Could you always tell when someone was fulfilled? Like when you went to interview them?
I believe so, yeah. I believe it has a kind of, I believe that there is a kind of an invisible vibration to having cracked the code. It's like, it's a twinkle in the eye. You're passionate without being attached, all right? So there's a passion to play thoroughly without attachment to outcome. And so you can feel there's a kind of freedom which leaves you absolutely free to participate with passion. So it's not the freedom of the Buddha statue or the Buddha archetype, like sitting completely detached and uninvolved. It's a freedom that leaves you free to move without any inhibition through the world and to participate fully. But to enjoy success and failure equally as just the fruits of participating.
Thank you for describing that. That's very appealing.
I think we all know it. You know, when you meet somebody who's just on fire, there's a twinkle in the eye. There's an amusement. There's a delight. There's a spontaneous gratitude, and a spontaneous delight and a curiosity about of everyone they meet. Right. So Byron Katie's very much like that. She became a close friend because I met her so early on. And, you know, I've sat with Byron Katie in an airport and she'll just like talk to everybody and be fascinated by everybody. It doesn't matter who they are. You know, she'll just like, tell me your story. Tell me your story. Oh, wow. What, you know, and that's, I think, one of the unmistakable hallmarks of someone who's just kind of cracked the code, who's kind of got the point of why we're here, you know?
Since we've got some time, I also want to, before we continue with this origin story, I'm curious about the early days of Byron Katie or Eckhart Tolle. Since you knew them before they were famous, were they exactly the same, or what was it like seeing them sort of become a recognized name?
Wow, well, that's a very personal question about them, but I would say Katie really hasn't changed much at all. You know, Katie is. I haven't noticed any particular change in Katie's disposition since I met her in 95, I think, maybe 93. She was traveling around the country with her husband. At that time, his name was Paul. She's now married to a different husband, Stephen Mitchell. But she was traveling around the country in an RV conducting weekend intensives in the work for like 3 people. The weekend I did with her, she did a talk at Spirit Rock with 30 people. Then we did a weekend. It was her and Paul and 3 other people in the room. I was one of them. So you got some pretty intensive work done. The work hasn't really changed that much in 25 years, and nor has Katie. She's stayed pretty much the same. Eckhart Tolle, I think Eckhart Tolle has come out a bit. I don't mean come out in terms of his sexual orientation, but I mean, he was quite withdrawn when I first met him. He didn't have a driver's license. He'd never driven a car, as far as I remember. But he's become more animated, I think, in the last 25. I met him probably in 97, 98, I think, like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I was just curious about people that we sort of know as a snapshot of of like a finished product almost.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think I don't want to make that some kind of precondition. It just happens to be those 2 particular names you gave me have stayed fairly constant. But I don't think there's anything wrong with people reinventing themselves. I can think of other people who are equally fulfilled, who just are chameleons. They morph to their environment, and they're like, I consider myself pretty fulfilled, but I change my game all the time. Like the way how I'm showing up in the world and the conversations I'm in today is radically different than it was 10 years ago. And that's okay too. There's plenty of people who just, that's their gig. They're just like a snake. They keep shedding their skin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I identify more with that type of,
yeah. Well, I think if there's one thing that I really like to emphasize to people, and we can come back and talk about this later, the notion of sovereignty, but let's just drop in a little taste, a little preview of a conversation we could get into about sovereignty. I think one of the most important things to realize about this human game is that there really are no rules other than the ones you choose to set. There are no rules. People try and make rules. Governments and religions, educational systems, socioeconomic systems will try and impose rules upon you, but there really are no rules other than the ones you choose to participate in. So you could think about it like Disneyland. You're American, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you've probably been to Disneyland in Anaheim at some point.
We went to Disney World in Florida, but yes.
Okay, same difference. Well, Disneyland in Anaheim, I took my kids there. So when they were little. So back in the day, I remember when we first went, I think the day pass was $25, as I remember. Now the last time I went, it was $137, but it's not that much. Anyway, you pay your day pass, you go in, and then there are no ride police. Nobody is monitoring which rides you go on. So you could go, there's a ride that goes twinkle, 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 and you just sit in this little thing and you go very, very, very slowly on its little boat, with little twinkly things. You could do that all day if you want. You could just go back to the line and you could just go on twinkle, twinkle, twinkle all day. There's a steamship that goes very slowly in a lake, hardly moves. And then there are these incredible rides that go that just throw you around, in the dark with flashing lights, and, half the people throw up. You could do that all day if you want, or you could just keep going to different rides and no one cares. No one is watching you. You can do any sequence of rides you want. You can do anything you like. And I think that's actually how life really is. There are no rules. This earth provides a wide variety of different rides. And you can take any ride you want. If you want to spend your life making billions of dollars, you can do that. It's available. If you really want that, get the right education, move to Palo Alto. With dedication, you can do it. If you'd like to spend your life healing people's diseases, you can, if you study hard, you can go to medical school, you can do that. If you want to write books, you can do that. If you want to fall in love, you can do that. If you'd like to sell your body for sex, you can do that. And there's no judgment. You can do it. If you want to sell cocaine or heroin to people, you can do that too. You might end up in jail, but that's part of the risk you take with the ride you've chosen. If you'd like to kill somebody, if that's what you want to do, it is available to you. You're going to pay a price. You're going to pay a price in possibly, going to jail for the rest of your life and possibly feeling really bad about it. But nevertheless, the rules are the ones you choose, right? And I mean, I included killing somebody as a kind of extreme example because I think if you actually reflect deeply, you will realize you don't want to do that. You see, if I reflect deeply, I realize, I've thought about this sometimes, because when the whole Trump mania was getting out of control, everybody was saying you should get a gun because if Trump loses the election, there's going to be a civil war and you should have a gun. And I said, I don't want a gun. I don't want a gun. They said, but somebody might try and shoot you. I said, I would rather be shot than shoot somebody, you see, but that's my choice, right? Yep. I am choosing from my own rule set. I don't want to kill somebody. If somebody approaches me with a gun, I would rather die that way than kill somebody else, right? Because I just don't choose to do that. But you see the difference, that's my rule. I've created the rule that I choose to not let that be the ride that I'm on. I'm not saying I'm not going to kill somebody because it's illegal. I'm saying it's because it's against my values. And that's the meaning of sovereignty, you see, that you start to abide by rules that you have created.
Yes. Yeah, fantastic. This is perfect. Glad you brought that in. And I think this is perhaps a lot of people are aware that this is something important right now, or perhaps people are becoming aware that sovereignty is one of the big issues of this moment in history.
Right. Sovereignty is the antidote to power imbalance. Right. Do you want to riff on that for a moment?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. So if you look at it, there's a lot that's wrong with the world. We have massive social injustice. We've got racial inequality. We've got a 70% disengagement in the workplace. So consistently for 20 years, there's been a Gallup poll, the same Gallup poll every year for 20 years. It shows that 70% of people who go to work are not engaged in their work. In other words, they would quit if they could. And that figure has not changed, right?
Oh, wow.
So actually, if you look at what's the difference between us and the 2.3 million other species on the planet? Why have we become so destructive to the ecosphere in a way that much more than other creatures? And there are different answers to that question, but one thing that really characterizes the way human beings interact with each other is power imbalance. And when I say that, it's co-created. Like power imbalance is like a pyramid, It's like a pyramid, but that it's more like a sort of steeple. It's kind of like a triangle, like a steeple. So in other words, how would you say, like tall and not that wide at the bottom?
And there's the triangle, the pyramid on the dollar bill, which is what it makes me think of.
Yeah, exactly. So the dollar bill is it's kind of giving a clue. Yeah, so it's like a pyramid where you get a small number of people at the top of the pyramid with all the power, and they've not just got the money. I mean, we often hear about 80% of the world's wealth is owned by 1% of the world's population, and I think if you go to 0.1%, 1 in 1,000 people, it's still like more than 50%, right? So that's an imbalance of financial equity, and that may very well soon be disrupted by cryptocurrencies, which are coming in very fast now. You probably know Tesla just bought $1.5 billion. I think Apple bought $2.7 billion, and Apple's planning to offer crypto in their Apple Pay. So it's game over, It's game over for fiat currency. If that escalates, we're going to see a very, very rapid movement towards decentralized currency. But that's a whole nother topic we can get into as well. But boy, you can see what the problem with interviewing somebody with ADD is. The conversation goes all over the place. So if we get back to this thing about the pyramid, right? it's not just an imbalance of financial equity, it's an imbalance of creativity and self-expression. Because the thing about, if you don't have enough money and therefore you're forced to work in a meaningless job, long hours, and not to have a great time, just to survive, just to put a roof over your head and food on the table for your loved ones, it doesn't only take your time, it takes your creativity. There's no time left in your day to self-express or to give the gift you were born to give. So the more tragic inequality is not just financial, it's to do with self-expression and creativity. And it's tragic because even people who have gobbled up all the equity, they're not using it necessarily for self-expression. They're using it just for kind of meaningless hoarding, So there's all sorts of inequity. There's inequity around health, because somebody with a lot of money, you saw that when COVID was really happening. I mean, I think, a huge number of GOP congressmen, usually not women, but congressmen got COVID. All of Trump's inner circle got COVID. They got it for a few days. Why? Because they had the money to get all the best treatment, But as you probably heard, COVID has hit people of color much worse. It's hit disenfranchised minorities much worse. And that's also an imbalance of equity, access to healthcare. So there's all sorts of imbalance of equity. So basically, what you could say defines kind of corrupted capitalism, it's not even pure capitalism, it's a corruption of capitalism, is imbalanced power. Mm-hmm. But it's important to recognize the psychological preconditions which create that imbalance, because we're fond of just blaming the person at the top, right? So let's take the last 4 years in America, the reign of King Donald, where a lot of people who didn't like him really focused all their dislike onto him. Like Donald Trump is a terrible person. And yeah, I mean, I can totally understand why one might come to that conclusion. There was a certain kind of gauche tastelessness in his presentation. But we've got to remember that somebody with Donald Trump's disposition only ever got there, and let's not single out Donald Trump. It's true of, this would be true of any, Harvey Weinstein, who wrecked Harvard in Hollywood, or many other people who've behaved without empathy. They didn't get there on their own, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you saw this film, The Vow, which was a film about Nixium. It's a cult. It was a cult run by Keith Raniere. Did you watch that?
No, I haven't seen that.
Oh, that was on. It was a show on HBO. It's a show about it's a series about a cult. It's very interesting because when we understand the dynamics of a cult is just an accentuated form of what's happening anyway in society. The whole of society is a cult. When we create celebrities and get fascinated by what they have for breakfast, that's a kind of cult mentality as well. So this imbalance of power, it doesn't just mean that you've got people with a certain personality type at the top of the pyramid, which is usually a personality type characterized by narcissism, by a craving for attention, and fairly low empathy usually. But you've also got, unfortunately, a large number of people, much larger number of people, who for mysterious reasons have a predisposition towards outsourcing their sovereignty. In other words, outsourcing their meaning. They're looking for meaning and direction and values in other people. And that's what we do with celebrities. Celebrities, influencers, it's called an influencer on social media. A celebrity will tell you what kind of clothes are cool to wear and what kind of food to eat. And now you should be paleo, or now you should be vegan. And very often we're doing that because somebody cool has said that that's the cool thing to do. Now, it used to be cigarettes, right? It used to be that cool people would smoke, menthol cigarettes. And we go, oh, well, that's what makes me cool. So you smoke the menthol cigarettes. But that's all an outsourcing of values, Sovereignty means to return to sourcing your values within yourself.
So Here's what I'm thinking as you say that, that it takes some work to, identify your values and then have sovereignty around them. So it's almost sort of a default to give other people that influence, and it's just that's
Right.
what creates the power imbalance. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's the way that we're conditioned, right? And that's what we're going to need to change. Is the way human beings are born very, very malleable. I'm sure you know that. You know that a human being is born fairly helpless, and that's not true, for example, of a foal. A foal is able to run around and eat grass, pretty quickly, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of mammals, the gestation period is not necessarily longer in terms of time, but longer in terms of development. So the kind of helpless stage that a baby goes through, that is all completed in the womb in many other mammals. Like, for example, for an elephant, a baby elephant is born and pretty quickly is up to speed,
Yep.
But a baby, their brain has not finished developing when they're born. So we spend the first few years in utter helplessness. You can't even walk for the first little while. You have to be carried around. You don't develop the capacity to speak or communicate. So we are utterly and completely dependent, which makes our brains remain extremely plastic for the first 7 years. I mean, your brain and therefore your beliefs can be therefore your behavior patterns and your emotional responses can be reformed in all sorts of ways in the first 7 years, which means that we're very, very, very impressionable. Whatever we're told in those first 7 years, it's going to take a lot of work to undo it. So just because of the way everything's structured, it's convenient. If you're going to have to look after other people, it's convenient to condition them towards obedience, right? That's what makes it manageable to be a steward to somebody else. So if you think about it, that maybe it's a little different now because we are maturing. Do you have children yourself?
I do, and I'm thinking of that. They're 2 and 4, and
All right.
It's so much easier when they are obedient. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what. Whenever your children ask why, the great gift you can give them. Whenever your children say why, the great gift you can give them is to say, "Great question. Let's discuss it." Right. But that's not how many of us were raised. The parent says, "Clean your room," and the kid says, "Why, Mama? Why?" And the parent says, "Because I tell you to," right? And this is maybe a little less now, but when I grew up, the word that the phrase that was repeated most often is, "Don't answer back to me." And if I asked why, I was told, "Because I told you to." That's enough of that, you see? So all of this is conditioning you to not be curious and to do what you're told. And that's called character building. And then I was sent to, this is, of course, years ago, decades ago, but I was sent to school at 4 years old. And now kindergartens are a little bit more playful, but then it was all about following the rules. And the way that education operated back then, and it's still true to some degree now, you learned by rote. 2 times 2 is 4, 2 times 3 is 6, etc. You learned your times table. And we didn't have computers, so you just learn this off by heart. You'd learn all these facts. So it was a filling the bucket approach to education. You're an empty bucket. You're going to be filled with pre-assigned information. And then you do a test to see if you can repeat back what you've been fed. So at least education used to have very little emphasis on encouraging curiosity. Now, there are these great educational systems like Waldorf and Montessori and others that have flip that around and encourage children to be curious, which is how you become intelligent. But at least the default that we're moving away from is to condition obedience. So obedience in parenting, obedience in education, but also in religion, right? So when you go to church, there's a holy book, and that's what's true, what's written in the holy book. So the Bible and Wikipedia are different because Wikipedia is open source, right? Or even like quantum physics. Quantum physics and the Bible are different because quantum physics is open source. Anyone intelligent can make a contribution to quantum physics and the whole thing upgrades. And then the whole system across the world upgrades. Oh, now we understand this, right? So I was interviewing, for my podcast, I was interviewing a guy called Vlatko Vedral, who's a professor at Oxford University, professor of quantum mechanics. And he is trying to prove Schrodinger's cat experiment. In other words, that two quantum outcomes actually happen simultaneously. He's able to do that at a micro level, at a quantum level. Well, if he proves that, the entire field will be upgraded immediately. But that's not true in religion. You see, with the Bible or the Quran or any of the holy books, it's not open source. You can't upgrade it. It's like it's fixed, right?
Yep.
So we get conditioned by the way that parenting happens. We get conditioned by education. We get conditioned by religion. And then you get conditioned by a bunch of other things when you become a teenager, like what's cool and, what are you going to fit in with? You go and buy jeans that are pre-faded with rips because that's what's cool. Like it's more expensive to buy jeans with holes in them than ones that are in good shape, And then you get into the workplace. Now, there are some innovative workplaces that are realizing you get more value from people if you encourage them to think outside the box, like Zappos is like that, for example. But most workplaces make you a cog in a machine to further the predefined goals of the founders and their investors. So the entire society is conditioning you towards not asking why. And you get from an early age, you're punished if you ask why. Religion will say that you'll be damned and go to hell if you question the tenets of the holy book. So you're conditioned through terrifying scenarios to be obedient. Well, of course, then, having been kind of traumatized into this disposition, when you become an adult, many of us, we can form one of three dispositions towards authority. Either we maintain that obedient disposition, which means we really stay in our relationship towards authority, we stay pre-teen, right? Which means whatever we're told to do, we do it.
Yep.
Yeah. So in a minute, I'll just find you a beautiful quote from a Leonard Cohen song that illustrates this from A Thousand Kisses Deep. Hang on just a minute. Let's see if I can pull that up. Yeah, this is from the song A Thousand Kisses. It's from the song In My Secret Life. And hang on, I'll get that for you in a minute. Yeah. I bite my lip. I buy what I'm told. I buy what I'm told. From the latest hit to the wisdom of old. But I'm always alone, and my heart is like ice, and it's crowded and cold in my secret life. So that's, Leonard Cohen, the great bard of our collective anguish, who, that's such a great line. I buy what I'm told, from the latest hit to the wisdom of old. And that's how we're conditioned. You're told what to buy because it's fashionable. You're told where to spend your money, and you're told where you must work and clock in and clock out to pay for all the stuff that somebody told you to buy, you see? So that's an obedient relationship towards authority. You do what you're told. Now, then there's a reaction to that, which is a teenage disposition towards authority. Many people just stay stuck for their whole lives in obedience. They do what they're told, right?
Yes.
They conform. A rebellious attitude towards authority is whatever you tell me to do, I'm going to do the opposite, right? So, and that's actually, America has more of a teenage society than some other cultures. And you can see this in the reaction to COVID. South Korea managed to deal with COVID in like 2 weeks. They flattened the curve super quick. Same with Switzerland. They flattened the curve super quick because Switzerland is basically an obedient authority. It's an obedient culture. So if the government says, wear a mask, stay indoors, everybody, every single person wears a mask and stays indoors, and they flatten the curve very quickly, right? In America, Dr. Fauci and the CDC was saying, flatten the curve and stay indoors, but the very president And his cohort said, no, I'm not going to do that. It doesn't look good on me. I'm not going to wear a mask. And so all the president's followers, and then you get this thing of conspirituality. Are you familiar with conspirituality? Do you know that podcast?
Mm-mm.
Oh, well, so it's interesting thing that in the last year, a lot of people who identify as kind of new age spiritual people actually ended up sort of adopting views that were very much consistent with right-wing people, which was because what they had in common was rebellion against authority, right? So this huge revolt in the Capitol on January 6th, we know the Capitol got overthrown. That was the extreme expression of rebellion against authority, right? So that's teenage disposition towards authority. Whatever you tell me to do, I'm going to do the opposite. And what happened in 2020, that spawned a massive amount of conspiracy theories. Like, you can't trust the media. You can't trust science. You can't trust anybody who looks like an authority figure. Bill Gates is evil. This was all reaction against authority, right? So now you've got these two dispositions. One is unquestioning obedience and allegiance to authority. Like, if this is an authority figure, they must be right. I'm going to follow what daddy says. Then you've got the opposite. Whatever they say is untrustworthy. And then there's the third category, which honestly right now probably doesn't constitute that big a segment of the population, which is what we could call sovereignty. It's an adult relationship to authority where you could say, okay, I'm going to join the conversation. I'm going to join the debate. So here's this scientist who's doing their best. Here's this investigative journalist who's doing their best. I'm going to digest what they're telling me, and I'm going to reflect upon it with discrimination. And I'm going to realize this person is not infallible. They're doing their best to move the conversation forward. So I noticed around COVID, for example, you could see different dispositions. The people who were obedient would wear a mask while hiking alone on a hiking trail. Like, what on earth, right? Like, in the middle of nowhere, you could see somebody like way ahead of you on the hiking trail wearing a mask. What is that supposed to do? I was wondering, do they wear a mask sleeping alone in their bed at night? Do they wear a mask in the shower? That's like an unquestioning relationship to authority. Like, they said wear a mask, I better wear a mask. And then you would get people who would just never wear a mask. There were people in my hometown who would literally go into the grocery store refusing to wear a mask. They would be asked to leave. They would refuse to leave, and they had to call the police because there was just this knee-jerk rebellion. And then you would find people who would wear a mask with intelligence, right? So they would realize, if you're hiking on a trail and you walk past somebody at walking speed, you don't need a mask, because you have to be in front of somebody for 2 minutes with just ordinary speaking for the droplets to actually have any chance of infecting you. So this would mean you're hearing the information, you're digesting it intelligently, and you're utilizing it with responsibility. That's a sovereign relationship to authority. If you develop sovereignty in all areas of your life, it means that you end up doing the work that you do because it's consistent with your values that you have discovered through your own process of introspection, and listening carefully to the whisper of divine intelligence. You marry the person you choose to marry for the same reason. You live in the place you choose to live, and you buy things with discrimination because you realize they're really good things to have in your life, not because someone's told you it's cool, And this requires discipline and sometimes support to realize, unless I apply discrimination and unless I deliberately unravel my conditioning, I'm going to end up in one of these conditioned responses. So to actually develop sovereignty in your life requires some kind of determination, discipline, and dedication to being an adult and to participate with other adults in co-creating a better world.
Wow. Yeah, this is fantastic. I've never heard someone describe how we came to this power dynamic in this way. And I'm also wondering about a fourth possibility of someone who, and perhaps it's like the adult version or the sort of the older person's version of just following the rules. Like when you decide you want to become the authority figure and just control people, when you're like, all right,
Yeah.
I'm done being obedient. Now I'm ready for people to be obedient to me. That seems like a fourth personality sort of stage.
It is, and I used to think I used to believe that in these power dynamics, the usually narcissistic leader, it's usually associated with narcissism, and it's usually associated with low empathy, right? Because you're willing to take more, as we talked about earlier, it's not just financial equity, it's creativity equity, it's equity of self-expression. Because you're willing to grab more for you and less for other people, that usually requires lower empathy and lower curiosity about other people. And I used to think that these two personality types were diametrically opposed to each other. But then I actually talked to an expert on narcissism, mm-hmm. who explained to me that they're just variations on the same thing. That that somebody who is somebody who feels the need to grab power and have power over others is only doing that because underneath they feel powerless. So it's not a sovereign choice. In other words, it's a choice made out of fear that unless I put my boot on your neck quickly, you're going to get your boot on my neck, you know? So if this woman that I talked to, actually in Clubhouse, where I think we met, right? Didn't we?
David Wood is the person, and he's a multi-time previous guest.
Oh yeah, on David Wood with the red hair. Yeah. So I talked to this woman in Clubhouse about this, and it's a very, very rare thing. She's a psychotherapist who works with narcissists, and I think she's probably the first psychotherapist I've ever met who has that niche specialization, because narcissists generally don't want psychotherapy. You see, if you
That's
go,
what I was going to say.
Yeah, I know. If you go on Amazon, and I know this because I've done it. If you go on Amazon and you type in narcissism, you'll find there's a bunch of books. And at least when I last checked, all the books on narcissism were how to deal with a narcissist, how to get free of a narcissist, how to not be dominated. They were all about how to be in relationship with a narcissist or get free of a relationship. I couldn't find any books about how to recover from narcissism, because narcissistic personalities generally don't have that aspiration. So there are a few recovering narcissists in the world. I would count myself among them. But it takes kind of, I guess, some luck, really. It takes some good luck to bump into the right forces that will inspire you to reflect upon the fact that having power over others is a lose-lose game, right? In any power imbalance, everybody loses. And this is something we often don't recognize, you know, that, well, let me just leave that. We can explore that more, but that's an important thing to understand, that at least it's been an important thing for me to understand, that in any power dynamic, everybody's a loser. It's only in co-creation that everybody becomes winners.
Man, I think you could just drop the mic right there, and that could be, because that's I don't even know how that's impacting me necessarily, but that's that's the central thing of our time, you know, this how we co-create together,
right?
And you know, we're dealing with this opportunity of, well, what now that if we assume we can co-create anything we want, like you said, the rules that we're setting, you know, the only rules are the ones we set, then what do we want to create? And it feels like a new opportunity to start over in a lot of ways.
Yes. And I think it's fair to say that, and this is where COVID in a way was a blessing in disguise. Of course, you know, a lot of people got sick, which we don't want that. And a lot of people died, which was tragic. And a lot of people were very negatively impacted economically, which is also a secondary kind of tragedy. But alongside that, many people had much, much greater opportunity to self-reflect. A lot of our usual distractions were taken away. You couldn't travel anymore. You couldn't socialize. You couldn't go out for dinner anymore. So a lot of people found out what it's like to either be alone with yourself for a while or to be in close interaction with other people where you have to learn to get along with people. And so I think, 2020 was a year when many of us got to, we was kind of sent to our rooms to think about what we've been doing. And so that was actually really good for co-creation and for sovereignty, because we got to reflect upon, hey, maybe I don't need to be going on cruise ships and going to the Caribbean to be happy. Maybe I can be happy right here with my organic garden. And maybe I don't need to go to work. Maybe this remote work is a pretty good thing. And maybe I don't need a lot of what I thought I needed. And so I think, first of all, I think we're going to see, I think some of the decrease in consumption is going to be permanent out of choice. And what's emerging out of that, so that's kind of not good for the economy as we recognize it. But I don't know if you've heard already about decentralized autonomous organizations, DAO. Do you know what that is?
Mm-mm.
Well, to some degree, Wiki is a DAO. It means there's no central office. There's no one person in charge. The internet is a DAO. There's no central office for the internet. It's a system that regulates itself from all parts of the system. So Bitcoin is all cryptocurrency are DAOs, right? Okay. So, and it's very possible now. It's really the only determinant of how long it will take is how long it takes people to adjust. But we actually, at this point, we could immediately shift all currency to crypto now. The systems are in place. We could just abandon the dollar tomorrow. I'm probably going to get assassinated for saying this in public, but because people don't, powers in be don't want it. But we could actually get rid of all fiat currency now, and we'd be fine on crypto, especially multiple currencies. Like there could be hundreds or thousands of currencies for slightly different purposes.
Yes. And
it's all decentralized. So there's no bank needed. And there's no bank needed to scrape off fees, and also the traditional understanding of usury disappears, because although you can make money on crypto by having it, it works differently than traditional usury. You're not making money by lending money to people. You're making money by owning an asset which is increasing in value. But you're not doing that at anyone else's expense. So the combination of people reflecting upon what they want to do with their lives and the simultaneous emergence of decentralized organizations is going to transform society as we know it very, very, very quickly. I think we're going to see more change in the next 2 years than we've seen in the last 30, and I mean, in the last 30 years, we've seen the adoption of the internet. We've seen the iPhone. We've seen portable devices become a norm. So it's interesting. If you go back and watch a movie like Sleepless in Seattle or something, one of these movies from the 90s.
Yeah.
It's amazing to see people, the phone rings and they pick up a phone with a little, a handset with a little cable, a little wound up cable going to a phone, It's fun to go watch a movie from the 90s. Sleepless in Seattle, that's a good one. Secret Magnolias, or it's fun to go back and realize how differently we lived. And if you wanted to communicate with somebody, you could telephone them if they pick up the phone. Otherwise, you would write them a letter. And in Sleepless in Seattle, he goes on the radio, he goes on a talk show. And then he gets a lot of mail. And you forget that people would communicate with handwritten notes through the mail. And so everything moved more slowly. Well, we've seen this incredibly fast shift. Now now we've gotten used to a completely different way of living. I mean, the problem with websites getting adopted originally was no one understood what it was. So when websites first started up, there was very slow adoption because people just couldn't get their head around what it is. Like, what do you mean? Where is it? You know, because people were used to a store. If you had a business, it had a physical location. So where is this website? And you say, well, it's on the web. Well, where's the web? Right? It's like, I don't understand. Where is this thing? You know, so it took the adoption of websites was like an exponential curve. It started off really slow. And then once people caught on, it just mushroomed. Then everybody had a website. This all happened in the 90s.
Yes.
So I can remember mid-90s, there were almost no websites. And they were just like, it was mostly university departments that were having sites. But businesses, it took a while to catch on. And so this is going to be the same with DAOs, that right now they're very tentative. Like, I just went out to breakfast this morning with my wife, and I've been invested in crypto for a while because I kind of got the point of it, you know, but she didn't get the point. She said, it's gambling. It's just gambling. It's going to go up and down, and it's nothing to do with real money. Well, after Tesla invested $1.5 billion, and I believe, I'm not sure if Apple really did 2.7 billion, if it was a rumor, but anyway, now that she's seeing it getting adopted, she got a bit more curious. I explained it to her, lights went off in her head, and now she's opened a Coinbase wallet and invested, you know. So that's just, conversations like that are happening every day, that people are realizing, oh, it's like that. So we're going to see this massive exponential now adoption of people participating in organizations that are decentralized. Now, the thing about cryptocurrency, it's not just an alternative currency. It's a decentralized way of operating, which means there's no founder giving interviews. I mean, this guy, Satoshi Sakamoto, I can't remember his name. No, he may not even exist. It may just be fictitious, right? So there's nobody to give interviews. There's no one setting policy. There's no Mark Zuckerberg. There's no Bill Gates. And once people realize that those kind of organizations are so preferable because there is no founder, there is nobody getting famous, there's no celebrity involved. It's a self-regulating, autonomous organization. And once we iron out the kinks, we're going to realize collectively that's a way better deal. And then we're going to start to see leadership becomes something that is sourced in the collective, which is amazing, right? That is the way out of the power imbalance. It means that you can, and you can see this happening already. This is not so mysterious. You can see how leadership can emerge out of relationship between people in a network instead of out of the peak. Now, have you ever been on, do you have like a large family? Do you have like brothers and sisters? And,
I'm actually an only
oh,
child.
Me too. Me too. So have you ever been on vacation with a group of people, like 10 or 12 people on vacation together?
Sure. Yeah. All my college buddies and I get together every year.
Sweet.
Yeah.
So when you go on vacation together and it's time to cook a meal or watch a movie or do stuff, you don't really need an elected leader to make the decisions of the day, right? Like you might go on vacation together and go, oh, let's do this, you know, hey, let's make breakfast. Great idea. I'll do eggs. You do, you know, and there's nobody emerges as the leader or the founder. There's no power structure involved, right? Mm-hmm. So sometimes you get people who want to dominate a little bit, but it's usually regulated by the system. If somebody dominates, at some point, somebody will make a joke and just say, Josh, chill, man. You're just getting a little hyper, you know? So we do know what self-regulating systems are like. Non-profits often operate that way, that somebody takes leadership for a year because they're chosen and elected and they cannot be in that position for more than a year. So we do know what flat systems are like, non-hierarchical systems. We just haven't come to accept them yet. But now we're looking at actual structures where hierarchy, anti-hierarchy is built into the system. And if we accompany the personal claiming of sovereignty with the recreation of these systems, human society is going to change more in the next few years than it has in the last 100.
Yeah, and I see that these, you can't have one without the other, because I'm actually just thinking, I'm reading this book about the beginnings of the fall of the Roman Empire, and they actually had a system in place, partly that was like, you can only be the leader for 1 year. Your term in the Senate was only, presidency essentially was only a year. But there was other parts of that system that encouraged the sort of the obedience and the discipline and the pushing people with political ambition to the top.
Yeah.
So you need both the system and the sort of the individual to learn, or either the young people learning sovereignty or the old people like deconditioning into sovereignty.
Exactly. Let me just reflect something back, Derek, because you said you just read a book about the Roman Empire, right?
Yes.
So that means you were able to read this book to fully digest both the triumphs and the failures of the Roman Empire and learn from it, right?
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah. So one big difference between the Roman Empire and now is that you've read that book, but they couldn't read that book because they were living it, right?
Yeah.
So we've got the benefit of learning from their mistakes. And not only from their mistakes, we've got the benefit of learning from every example of attempted hierarchy and power dominance that has ever happened. And hopefully we've got to the point now that we can not just tweak these systems, but thoroughly recreate them. In other words, not just recreate hierarchy with a tweak, but actually abandon hierarchy and explore decentralized systems.
There's a quote that I really love. I believe it's Einstein that says, you can't solve a problem at the same level of consciousness it was created. And
I've got to tell you a super funny story about that quote.
Okay, yeah. Well, I was just going to say, like, that's exactly, recreating a different hierarchical system is just the same level.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So would love your story.
Oh, it's a red herring. It's a non sequitur. It's just a funny story. So it's actually funny. That is a great quote, but I mean, it's a very meaningful quote, but Einstein didn't actually say exactly that. If you go back to the German, he was specifically talking about mathematics. And what he was saying is, you cannot solve a mathematical equation within the same limits of mathematics that the unsolved problem was created in. So that quote in German was loosely translated from German to English in a spoken conversation in 2002. And in 2002, somebody reflecting upon that in German said it to somebody in English, and the somebody in English wrote it down and then put it into a book mistranslated as, you cannot solve any problem in the same state of consciousness in which it was created, right? Mm-hmm. And basically, the book in which it was mistranslated is this one, which...
That was you.
That was me. So I actually mistranslated Einstein, and it has just become a meme ever since, that it just got bounced around. So my mistranslation became actually a shared meme so it's kind of a fun thing.
I love it. That's fantastic. And it's just as powerful. It applies just as well.
Yeah.
A way to I'm thinking of a way to bring this back, to loop this back to radical brilliance.
Yeah,
and
sure.
There is the everyone confined at home because of COVID, and you being confined after your brain injury. There's a parallel there of reflection.
Yeah.
So perhaps that's the way that we can sort of come back into your story.
Sure.
You developed this
Yeah.
model, and I still would love, because it's such a fantastic working model, would love to talk about that as well.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. So I can pick it up and we can actually condense it a bit. So as I was saying, I was, in this dark room doing some reverse engineering in my head. What is it that makes these people that we talked about so incredibly fulfilled? And initially I was thinking it was one thing, that there was one predeterminant that caused fulfillment. And in a way there is, but it's what causes it that's interesting. So you could say what people have in common who are incredibly fulfilled is, to borrow a word from India, they have discovered their dharma, right? And there isn't an exact translation for that word, but it's loosely translated as purpose, like why you're here on the planet, that you somehow recognize, not through figuring it out, but just through sort of relaxing, you realize that you were born to deliver a particular kind of gift. The gift might be just the way that you show up. The gift might be simply your natural disposition. But you were born to deliver a certain kind of gift. And if you give that gift, your life will find its fulfillment. And if the gift remains ungiven, which it tragically mostly does, you will live in desire and fear and frustration, but you'll always have this nagging feeling that you didn't quite live what you came here for, right? And I'll just give you a quick illustration of that. Just, I'll just think of both, I don't want to go down too far down this road, but just to give an example. I'll just give an example of both my grandfathers. So my mother's father was born in Northern Ireland, and he grew up on a kind of an estate, like, it was like a landowner, somebody who owned a lot of land, and he loved plants. He loved growing things. And he, sorry a minute, I just lost my train of thought. So he loved plants, he loved growing things, and he wanted to open a market garden. That's what he really wanted to do, was grow vegetables, grow fruits and vegetables, and sell them in the market. His father said that is not a suitable profession for someone of your social status, because England and Northern Ireland was very much about social class. So instead, my grandfather became a stockbroker. He was active as a stockbroker in 1928 at the time of the Great Crash. He had a severe nervous breakdown, never recovered, and just lived a kind of wreck of a man after that. He never really, never bounced back. So that kind of haunted him his whole life, the memory of wishing he had been a market gardener. And you could say he never lived his dharma. He never lived what his heart told him he was there to be there for. Now, my other grandfather, my father's father, went to Oxford University, and he played cricket for Oxford. And you can actually find him on Wikipedia. Osmond Ardagh, he played in the team for Oxford. So that meant, to play that at that time, in the late 1920s, to actually be on the team for the most prestigious university in England meant you had every chance of a career as a professional cricketer, which today you would make, you'd be earning millions of dollars a year to be a professional athlete like that. But again, he was told that's not a gentleman's profession. He was sent off to the colonial service in Africa, where he was basically, the colonial service means he was being a colonialist. He was actually, ruling over a colonized country. And again, he died in his 50s. I never knew him. He died before I was born. But there you can see both my grandfathers, they didn't live their dharma. They lived something they were told to do. And honestly, most people these days, they don't end up living the unique gift they were born to live. That's what I do now that's my work. You know, that's my work as a coach, is I help people to discover the big impact they were born to make. And I help them really, you know, really activate the machinery necessary to make it happen. So now we could say that, maybe you could say that is the precondition to real fulfillment, is that you discover your dharma and then you are fully on fire. You know, you wake up every morning full of energy, you bounce out of bed, you naturally eat the right foods to be healthy because you've got a dharma to give. You get enough sleep, you take care of yourself, you have great relationships, money flows in and out because you've got a mission and everything is in service to that mission. However, we've got to ask ourselves, why do some people discover their dharma and others don't? Right? Okay, so let's unwrap this a little bit. So I don't know, are people going to see this on video or is it going to be mostly on audio?
Yeah, if you could swing your mic out the way a little bit, it's
yeah. But what's the proportion of people who are on video and audio for your podcast?
It could eventually be more on video.
All right. Well, what we're looking at here is like a clock. So you can see 12, 3, 6, and 9. And originally, I thought of these lines as lines, which is how they're always thought of, a linear line that you get better at. And you'll see how this works as we explore it. It took me that 3 months laying in bed to realize that they're not lines, it's actually a cycle. And the more rapidly and easily you can move through the cycle, the more brilliant you can become. So I'll briefly just give you a tour of this cycle, if that's okay, and then we can see if you have questions. Does that sound
fantastic? Great.
So let's look at this. You can see it like a clock, 12, 3, 6, and 9. So let's start at the top, 12 o'clock. 12 o'clock is the place in the cycle that we generally think of as spiritual awakening, right? So it's moments, at least, of complete transcendence, where all the boundaries disappear. There's just infinite space. You're actually free of desire. There is neither masculine nor feminine. You're just empty and completely free, right? Those are known as kind of enlightenment moments, Satori, Nirvana, you know, but you can also have that bungee jumping or jumping out of a plane. When you jump out of a plane, you know, and you're falling through space, you're not going to be thinking about your to-do list. Your mind switches off, which is why we do a lot of extreme things. So extreme sports will bring you into that space of emptiness, complete emptiness and oneness with the creative source. Okay, so let's just wrap in the brain chemistry for a minute. When you're at this point in the cycle, we're talking about serotonergic brain activity. It means your brain is dominated by serotonin. So, which means you're feeling empty and peaceful. And also the default task network is basically switched off. Also, the part of your brain at the back, which navigates space, there's a part of so, you know, if you move through space and you can see something and you stop, that's because you have the capacity to navigate three-dimensional space. Now, yes. Each of your eyes cannot do that on its own. You need both eyes. If you wear a patch over one eye, you're going to bump into things. You need both eyes to navigate three-dimensional space. But actually, what's happening is the information from each retina is being processed by the brain to recreate three-dimensional space in your brain to compute your ability to navigate. Animals with whiskers, you know, like cats, they do it mostly through the information they're getting from their whiskers, right? The whiskers touch things, and that's how they know what they can go through and what they can't. If you cut a cat's whiskers, it's going to get stuck in things because the whiskers are the right width to be able to know what it can fit through and what it can't. So the part of the brain that navigates three-dimensional space basically shuts off. So when you're in this spaciousness, the part of your brain that can comprehend spatial limits shuts down and you experience infinity, right? So it's like looking into the sky and trying to grok the fact that there's no edge to the sky, right? So these are moments of awakening. Now, that's where we start on the cycle. When we have these moments, mostly one of two things happens. Either a mechanism kicks in, which is kind of nervous and anxious, and that thinks we should be doing something. So in other words, maybe you go bungee jumping, it's like, whee, but then as soon as the bungee cord clicks in, you're like, okay, what's next? Because we have this nervous tendency to want to make things happen. Yes. So you don't stay very long in the spaciousness, right? Or if you've been trained in any kind of meditation teaching that comes out of India, you may be predisposed to have an unfriendly disposition towards thought. So, from transcendental meditation to different mindfulness techniques, even to like Advaita Vedanta or Dzogchen, you are trained, don't follow the thoughts, right? Just stay in the moment, don't follow the thoughts, right? Which is a good teaching as far as staying in meditation. But if you develop an unfriendly disposition towards thoughts, like you don't want to follow any thought, you kind of miss the next part of the cycle. Because what happens in this orange arrow that moves between 12 and 3 is if you can have a disposition where you are not riding thought too enthusiastically, but you're also not repressing thought, you can actually start to ride these waves of creativity. Now, the only tradition I know of that has really mapped this out well is Kashmiri Shaivism. And I was actually just talking about this on another podcast yesterday, so I've happened to have the book handy. Kashmiri Shaivism, which emerged out of Kashmir, it has this text called the Vigyan Bhairav Tantra, which is a mythological story of Shiva talking to his consort Parvati. And this is the only tradition I know of that really celebrates the natural emergence of creative impulses out of nothingness, right? And so they call this spanda. Spanda is it's like the effervescence on the champagne. You've got the champagne and then just like half a centimeter above the champagne, there's this, if you put your hand right above the champagne, you'll feel the bubbles. Tickles it, right. So it's a very, very fine tickle. So this kind of science of this, it's called spanda, and it's written up in this book called the Yoga Spanda Karika. You see I'm holding it up. Mm-hmm. But it's also, you can find it in the Vigyan Bhairav Tantra as well. So Kashmiri Shaivism is really, this is very, very underdocumented, but this movement from spaciousness to creative flow, it begins as the tiniest tickle in a state of emptiness, right? And this tiniest tickle, it begins as bliss. It begins as unspecific ecstasy, right? You just feel good for no reason, happy. You feel energy for no reason. It's often a tickle in your belly. And it may sometimes feel like sexual arousal, but through your whole body. So it's very similar to sexual arousal, which is why the Vigyan Bhairav Tantra, of the 112 techniques that Shiva teaches Parvati to ride these waves, I think like 5 of them are sexual, so, and the other place you can find these teachings is in the tantric traditions in India. Mm-hmm. So this is a movement from 12 to 3 of riding these waves of creativity from emptiness into creative flow. So it begins with the tiniest tickle. And if you just allow it, if you just let it grow on its own, it becomes music that has never been heard before. So it's not like you're repeating a refrain. It becomes music that no one has ever heard before. It becomes poetry that no one has ever spoken before. It becomes a new app or a new technology that no one dreamed up before. It becomes original thought, you see. So, for example, Albert Einstein, and by the way, you can find this documented in almost every true creative. Albert Einstein, the way that he discovered the general theory of relativity was not in his laboratory thinking. He was relaxing in the bathtub. At 12 o'clock, he was relaxing, open and spacious, and it just revealed itself to him. Do you know Alex Ebert, the lead singer of Edward Sharpe and the Magnetic Zeros? Do you know that band?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you like, they have that song Home and Man on Fire. He would be a great guest, by the way, for your show. He's a good friend of mine, and I can hook you guys up by text message if you like.
Cool. Yeah.
He's a really good. So he talks about celestial archaeology. He says he didn't write any of his songs. They came to him. He just relaxed open and the song revealed itself. So he's very clear. He never wrote anything. He just puts himself in the way of creative flow. I think I mentioned to you, I was good friends with Leonard Cohen when he was alive. I started off interviewing him and then we became friends. And I can remember getting drunk with Leonard Cohen once in his apartment, or it was an apartment in West Wilshire in Los Angeles. We were drinking sake together, and we were talking about his album 10 New Songs, which came out in 2002. And I really felt like 10 New Songs was the best album ever made by anybody at any time in history. It was like the ultimately great album. So I was like fawning over this album. I'm saying, oh my God, it's an incredible album. And Leonard was just shrugging his shoulders like, yeah, I guess, And we actually had a kind of a fight, like a playful fight for about half an hour. We were both a little drunk, of like how great this album was, right? and he wouldn't take credit for it. And then after about half an hour, he kind of gave up because I guess I was being so belligerent. And he shrugged his shoulders and said, yeah, I guess something really came through there, didn't it? But you've got to mark the words. Something came through. He would acknowledge that Leonard got out of the way. So there was no Leonard. And then something had come through. And ironically, that all of the lyrics for that album, they all came through on Mount Baldy, where he was in a many-year meditation retreat. He was meditating in Mount Baldy in his late 50s. And that's where that album emerged. It didn't come through doing anything. So this is 12 to 3. Now,
so can I jump in here really quick because I'm trying to relate this to my own experience, and a lot of times I'll be sitting there just trying to calm my active mind, and I'll get a little silent, a little spaciousness, and then a brilliant idea will come in, and I just have to leap into action on it, and it's like I hardly have time to get back to the 12 o'clock, the beginning point, because they just come in so fast.
Yeah. How about this? That's a really great thing, but it's going to take us down a different rabbit hole. So how about, I've got a note. How about I just finish the cycle and then we can come back to what you said? Is that okay?
Okay. Yeah.
Is that good? Because I can totally comment on what you said, but it will take a few minutes. Is that all right?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's keep going.
Yeah. Okay. So 12 to 3 then, if we come back to the brain chemistry, it's the crucial neurotransmitter here is dopamine. So what happens as you begin to allow these small impulses to arise, it's tiny secretions of dopamine in the presynaptic neurons and high degree of sensitivity in the receptor sites. So a tiny bit of dopamine creates a very strong reaction. Now, as we move through this, and by the way, all the neurotransmitter stuff is stuff I got from brain scientists. I'm not a brain scientist myself, but as we move through this part of the cycle, the amount of dopamine being secreted in the presynaptic neuron increases, but the receptivity decreases. The sensitivity of the receptor sites goes down. So what it means is when we get to here, 3 o'clock, we're in full-on creative flow, just pumping creative flow, but we've become fairly kind of dull to it, which means, you could be jamming all night, right, with a band, or you could be just automatic writing. So you get massive amounts of flow, but the amount of kind of bliss or pleasure you get has gotten dampened, right? So that's where creativity can become an addiction because you keep needing more dopamine, right? So it's very similar to what happens when you take cocaine, that you need more and more extreme experiences to feel the high. All right, so now we're at 3 o'clock, maximum creative flow. Everything's just flowing through you. You can't stop it. You're up all night. It's a kind of fairly manic sort of state. right? Now, one kind of creative impulse that can arise at 3 o'clock is called intention. Intention is actually a type of creative impulse. It's just a creative impulse with a future image attached to it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So intention is creativity, but it's creativity married to the future. So what we could say is, okay, at 3 o'clock, we're jamming all night. You know, the band's jamming all night. And then you take a break and somebody says, hey guys, let's make an album. That's an intention, right? Or your automatic writing, you go, oh my God, this could be a novel. That's now an intention. So now you've projected into the future. You've just thrown a football up the field that you're going to have to catch up with of something you're going to accomplish. And as soon as you do that, you enter into the next phase of the cycle, which is about accomplishment and productivity. And that's about setting goals in the future and then moving towards them, right? Now, there's a kind of a masculine and a feminine style of moving through the blue phase. The blue phase, for those who can't see it, is going from 3 to 6 o'clock on the clock, right? You can move through this blue phase in a more masculine style, which both men and women could do, which is more about the hormone testosterone. And testosterone allows you to be single-pointed focused on a goal in the future and to just focus on it and block out everything else that's in the way. If you get to obstacles, you push through them, and there's a tendency to want to do it alone, right? Mm-hmm. I can do this. I got this. I can do this, right? There's also a more feminine style, more associated with the hormones estrogen and oxytocin, where there's more of a tendency to co-create, to be a team together. I've got your back, you've got mine. And there's a trust in that it's going to happen. You know, there's a trust in some kind of invisible force that's going to guide us through. But either way, whether there's a more masculine or more feminine style, as we get closer to 6 o'clock, closer to the deadline, closer to pulling this off, we start to excrete the hormone adrenaline from the adrenal gland above the kidneys, but the brain starts to run on, and I can never pronounce this, norepinephrine. I think it's what it's called. It's basically a stress neurotransmitter. Okay. Now, what that does, when you start to secrete these kind of stress, also cortisol could be involved. As you start to secrete these stress hormones and that neurotransmitter, basically it shuts down the parasympathetic nervous system and activates the sympathetic nervous system. So what that means is if your eyes are itchy and you need to go to sleep, you tune it out. If you need to go to the bathroom, you tune it out. If you're feeling sad or hurt, you tune it out. If other people around you are feeling underappreciated or not nourished by you, you tune everything out because you're on this deadline. Now, in order to tune things out, it's very important. You have to dull the parasympathetic nervous system, because the parasympathetic nervous system is what allows you to be sensitive to those things, right? Now, when we reach the goal usually it's an event in time. So the movie is released, the book is published, boom, we did it. Now, here's the interesting thing. Should I keep going, or do you have any comment at this point?
Keep going, please.
All right, okay. So one important thing to understand about accomplishing things in time is the phenomenon called double bind, which was recognized by Gregory Bateson in the late 20th century in a book called Towards an Ecology of Mind. Gregory Bateson said that double bind is intrinsic to all participation in life. If you fully participate in anything, you're going to have to make impossible choices. So in the example we just gave, if you've got a startup company and a young family, you're working 60, 80 hours a week to make the startup successful, but then you can't be there for your kids as much as you would have liked, right? Mm-hmm. Equally, if you've got some deadline, you could push through and meet the deadline, to be accountable, but that may be at the expense of your health, right? So double bind means you now have to make difficult choices where almost inevitably there's going to be some element of regret. You can't avoid feeling some element of, I messed up. Even if you succeed in one way, you failed in another, which is why, when a woman has a baby, for biological reasons, she has postpartum depression sometimes, but actually every creative will experience postpartum depression. People publish a book, it goes to #1 on the national bestseller. Wow, incredible. And the person experiences depression and burnout because of the double bind, you see. So
it's
what
like
we get...
the post-Olympics depression
that
a lot of athletes have,
Same, yeah. So now, right after 6 o'clock, you get to like 6:15, and we have what's known as parasympathetic flooding, right? So it's not just that you were running on sympathetic and it gradually goes over. You get a flood of all the suppressed parasympathetic nervous system activity, which means suddenly you feel incredibly tired, so tired that even if you sleep all weekend, you still can't get out of bed and you just can't get your energy back. You feel all the emotions you've been repressing to get the job done, now you're flooded with emotion, right? So if you do this enough, if you do this over months, 6:15 is a nervous breakdown, and it takes months to recover. What we want to do is go through this cycle so quickly that you can have a tiny nervous breakdown every day, and then doesn't build up, you see. But 6:15 is where you experience feelings like regret, shame, remorse, guilt, and failure. Those emotions got a bad rap from religions like Protestantism, Judaism, Catholicism. They kind of shoved those emotions down our throat and made them into an identity. In other words, it's not just you are a sinner. Like shame and remorse and guilt are your permanent identity. That's super toxic. But to be able to touch into these feelings, the feeling of shame or remorse or guilt, just for a few minutes, that's very healthy, because it becomes a visceral feeling which precipitates the process of learning. So at 6:15, if you just feel for a moment like, I can't believe I did that. If you feel viscerally the pain of having made a mistake, that visceral feeling of shame, just for a moment, will precipitate real learning. And that's what happens in this brown arrow between 6 and 9. It's about learning, and it's the pathway towards humility. So when we get to 9 o'clock, we have restored ourselves after this hyperactivity. We've restored ourselves to humility, to forgiving yourself, forgiving others, realizing I did my best. I don't have all the resources in the world, but I did my very best, and I can relax. I deserve to rest. Now, this movement from 6 to 9 is all about the neurotransmitter GABA. And GABA is the neurotransmitter which our brain suppresses the most because we're under so much pressure in the socioeconomic system. So if you go on vacation and really have a good rest, you are going to naturally replete GABA. You increase your GABA when you do nothing and rest and relax, GABA will increase. So when your brain is drenched in GABA, you feel, I'm a good person. I did my best with the resources I've got. I deserve to rest and relax. So that's 6 to 9.
And I'm, as per our conversation earlier with the decentralization and the power and the empathy, it seems like this is a key part of, experiencing these visceral emotions, but that's also like collectively allowing this part to happen.
Well, in our society, say it again. Sorry, I missed the last part. Excuse me.
Oh, just connected with learning empathy.
Yeah, I think, Derek, I think in our society, people only really go into 6 to 9 when they're forced to. So generally, people experience 6 to 9 mostly as a state of pathology, a nervous breakdown, grieving, bereavement, depression, you enter 6 to 9 because you have to. That's, in a way, that was the silver lining in COVID, is everybody was forced to do a bit of 6 to 9, to actually kind of chill and relax and learn to get used to just having a quieter life. Let's do the last phase, though. The last phase is from 9 to 12. In this state of humility, of extreme humility, you realize that you don't really do anything. You're such a small, tiny little ant in such a big universe. You don't have the power to do anything. So in that natural humility, you start to get curious. Who is really running the show? It's clearly not me. Who is making all these good things happen in my life? It's not me, as I think of myself usually, because I'm just an interference pattern. Who is really making it all work? If you ask that question and turn it inwards, it becomes self-inquiry and meditation. And then you discover, eventually, if you move from 9 to 12, you discover your true nature as infinite consciousness, as awareness without boundaries, and you come back to awakening. If you turn that attention outward into a kind of devotional practice, you fully focus on the divine, on the divine force that has created all this, and your heart is full of devotion, and that devotional path of love brings you to the same place. But either way, when you come back to 12, that's where meditation and devotion find their unity, that you realize that who you are and what the divine is are really the same. Your true nature and the nature of the divine source are really one and the same. That's where Jesus said, I and the Father are one. See? And then we come back to the top of the cycle again.
Wow. This is brilliant. When we're speaking of how this cycle operates, what sort of timescales are you generally referring to?
Well, what seems like we want is cycles within cycles. What's that red liquid you're drinking? It looks really good. It looks like hibiscus tea.
It's actually pomegranate juice with
nice.
Sparkling water.
Is that POM, P-O-M?
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. So what we really want is cycles within cycles. So, and the book, Radical Brilliance, it guides you through this, how you can move through this every day. So ideally, we want to touch into 12, 3, 6, and 9 every day. Just touch into it. You're probably going to have to spend most of your day in 3 to 6 because of the socioeconomic system. On Sunday, you can spend most of your day in between 6 and, well, you can probably spend Saturday in 6 to 9 and Sunday in 9 to 12. So traditionally, society was organized. So Sunday is a 9 to 12 day. Sunday is a day dedicated to God. Sunday is the day where you move from humility to oneness with God. That's how society used to be before shops were open on Sundays, So we want to have that every day, but equally it follows the seasons. So winter is a good time for 12 to be inward for contemplation. Spring is a good time to move from 12 to 3. Everything's coming alive again. Summer is a good time for 3 to 6, long days where you can work hard the whole day. You don't need to sleep so much. Fall is a good time for 6 to 9. Generally in melancholy, you self-reflect, I made those mistakes. People often go for a little melancholy in the fall. And finally, 9 to 12, winter is a good time for 9 to 12. So it's good to have these cycles annually. It's good to have these cycles daily, weekly, and also within the life cycle of a project. And all of this is spelled out in the book, Radical Brilliance.
Yes. I feel like there's so many places we could go, obviously, and we've allowed ourselves to explore a lot. We're heading towards wrapping this interview.
If you want to go longer, I can. It's up to you. If you want to keep it contained, it's fine. But I'm enjoying this, so whatever you want.
Yeah, I'm enjoying it as well. Well, I would just want to offer a few things. You've talked in the book about our optimizing different things in our life with this cycle in mind, like our routine and our diet and supplements and all those things. We also had a placeholder on, that experience that I have of, just ideas flooding in as soon as I get a moment of silence. Let's actually start there with that.
Okay. Well,
because I'll be on a run and an idea will come and I'm like, I have to act on it before it goes away.
Yeah.
Because it's such a fantastic idea.
Great.
But it feels suboptimal in some ways.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm getting pinged all the time. Let me just, there we are. I think there's some kind of way that you can tell the phone that you don't want to be disturbed. I don't know where that little thing is. Hopefully we're good now. Yeah. So first of all, I just wanted to pick up on the term calm the mind, because I would just kind of suggest gently, brother to brother, that trying to calm the mind is generally a fairly frustrating activity, because the impulse that wants to calm the mind is the mind. You see what I mean? Like I want to calm the mind. That is an intention which is occurring within the mind. So generally, when people enter meditation with the intention to try and calm the mind, it takes a long time. I mean, decades. And it's usually not the attempt to calm the mind that finally causes the calm. It's something else. So I would suggest, and this might just be semantics, but I wanted to pick up on it. Mm-hmm. I would suggest that the best disposition is to sit down and observe the mind with no preference whatsoever about whether it's calm or agitated. You're just going to sit and observe it. So the intention is, I'm going to sit here and watch the mind. Just like supposing that you sat down next to a freeway and just observed the traffic. There's nothing you can do about the traffic because you don't have any control over it. So you just let it pass. Now, if you take the disposition of observing the mind and the emotions and the body, what happens slowly over time is you relax more and more into the disposition of the observer, right? So you relax into realizing, I am not these thoughts. I am that which is observing them. Doesn't matter if they're agitated or calm. I'm not these emotions that keep changing. I am that which is observing them. I am not the body. I am the awareness which is observing them. And then very naturally, as you relax into that, there's a natural curiosity arises. Well, if I'm not the thoughts, because I'm obviously observing them, and if I'm not the emotions, because I'm obviously observing them too, and if I'm not the body sensations, because I'm observing them too, then who on earth am I? And then there's just this natural relaxing into recognizing, oh, I am that which is aware. And of course, that which is aware is called awareness or consciousness. And then as we relax into being that and we start to explore a little bit, what is this like? We realize it has no boundaries. It has no limits. It has no gender. It has no agitation. It has never been wounded. And although it observes the body, it's not the body. So it has never been incarnate. It's not a body. It's awareness. It has no form. And that, the recognition of that, is the recognition of that which is always at peace, you see? That is the recognition of that presence which has never been other than at peace, you see? And that is the central teaching of like Advaita Vedanta, which is made popular in the last century by Ramana Maharshi. It's the central teaching of Dzogchen in the Nyingma tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, which is instantaneous realization of that which has always been here. And then there's just an increasing comfort or there's an increasing, what's the right word? There's an increasing, relaxed comfort, getting comfortable with just being that, and that consciousness has never been other than completely at peace. It was only the identification. It was only the thinking that I am the thoughts that caused disturbance in the identity. See? So that was just a little tweak about if we try to calm the mind, it can be quite frustrating. If we just observe the mind, fairly quickly, we come into recognition that that which is observing has no problems.
Well, I understand what you're talking about, and that's perhaps that's different than my experience, or perhaps what you're talking about is sort of what I experience in a very quick amount of time, a handful of minutes, which is like I do have this sort of, you can feel a lot of thoughts rushing around. I can feel a lot of thoughts rushing around in my head, and when I'm still, they just sort of dissipate. And at some point, then I'm just awareness, like you're talking about, and it could be let's say 5 minutes, right? But then pretty soon a brilliant idea will come that is just different. Too exciting to let go of. And I would love to spend another 20 minutes in that sort of no mind state, but it's
exactly. Yeah, I didn't address that yet. Yeah, that was the second part of what you said. I was just first addressing the term trying to calm the mind. But let's go for the second part. Yeah, so that's great. So what I recommend you do, which has worked well for me, is keep with you at all times a small notebook. And I like to have a really beautiful notebook. If you just wait a moment, I'll go find it. Like something like this is good. You can go online, find some kind of leather-bound, beautiful notebook. Sometimes you can pay like $100 for one of these, it's like a really nice thing. And I have a fountain pen. I don't actually see where it's gone today, but I have a fountain pen made by Parker, so it works on real ink. I actually fill it up from a bottle of ink. Yes. So there's a certain ritual aspect to this. So I keep a book and a pen with me. Alternatively, you may have one of these already. You can get one of these, a little voice recorder, right? Mm-hmm. And you mentioned you were running. So I have the same thing with walking. So you buy online a little clip-on lapel mic like this. So it clips onto your clothes, plugs into the red input on the recorder. You slip it in your pocket. And then, because it's very intelligent what you're saying, when you are most spacious, most relaxed, that's where these brilliant thoughts will kind of slip through the gaps. And we want to be able to capture them. So the book, Radical Brilliance, it talks about tickle and capture. There are certain techniques for tickle, to kind of to tickle those things into existence. And then there are techniques for capture. And you want to be able to capture them. It's true. You want to be able to capture those things when they pop in.
Okay, fantastic. And I'm thinking of who is it? The inventor Edison, perhaps, that did he held the ball bearings in his hand, and he would fall asleep with his hands over a metal pie dish, so that as he would fall asleep with a particular invention problem in his mind, and then he would sort of go into that dreamlike state, but then he would drop the balls and it would wake him up, and he would write down everything towards solving this patent.
That's interesting. Well, I only know that story relative to Salvador Dali, the surrealist painter, but it was a bunch of keys. So he would sit in a chair. He would sit in a chair holding a bunch of keys with a metal bowl underneath. And when he fell asleep, he would drop the key. So he was still in a kind of semi-asleep state. Whoa. And then he would go back and paint, and you can see what kind of stuff came out of that. There's the work of Salvador.
Those guys knew each other? I wonder if one of them told the other one, if it was like a podcast like this, and Dali was like, "Oh, you should try dropping something."
No, not sure about that. Yeah, no. Wow. I've only heard it I've only read it anyway, relative to Salvador Dali.
Huh. That's fascinating. Cool. Okay, so tickle and capture. All right.
I think one thing we might just want to mention to round this out, what I explained about the brilliant cycle, just so people don't feel inadequate, is entirely theoretical, right? So I mean, very, very, very few people have that cycle flowing freely every day. It's rather like you go to the acupuncturist, and acupuncture describes this flow of meridians, the flow of chi through the meridians.
Yes.
But almost nobody has a free flow of chi through the meridians at all times. Most people have blockage in the meridians. So if you go to the acupuncturist will take your pulse and will notice, oh, there's a little deficiency in the kidney meridian, but there's a little excess heat in the lungs, right? And then we'll do some acupuncture. Mm-hmm. And however healthy you are, there's always some excess and some deficiency. So in the book, Radical Brilliance, in one chapter, we describe the cycle, but in the next chapter, we describe blockage. So there are 4 kinds of blockage that almost everybody has. One is addiction, that we get addicted to one of these 4 quadrants. Mm-hmm. One is resistance, that we go into judgment of one of the 4 quadrants. Another one is aspiration resistance, which means we aspire to something slightly further along the cycle, but it seems impossible. And the 4th is looping, where you just go round and round in circles in one small part of the cycle. And most of us are subject to blockage. Now, because there's 4 kinds of blockage and 4 quadrants, you've actually got 16 ways that the cycle gets blocked. And that's pretty much the story of human beings, is that we hold back our brilliance because of one of those 4 kinds of blockage. Once you realize that, we can map out, you've heard of like hacking, biohacking, neurohacking, life hacking. You can actually take almost any hack that anyone has ever thought of and realize that it is an efficient way to move around the cycle from one place to another. So almost every hack fits somewhere into the cycle.
Mm. Do you see a place, the most common blockage in America, perhaps?
Well, I suppose the most common blockage is to get addicted to 3 to 6, accomplishment, getting things done, which means to develop, and also to develop judgment about, not the opposite, but about 6 to 9, to develop judgment around resting, self-reflection, like people call it staring at your navel, like it's a waste of time. So the American society is overly accentuates productivity.
When you're working with a client, when you're coaching someone, is this, how big of a part of your work is just getting them moving through the cycle? Because I know you were training people even before you came up with this.
Yeah.
So how much of this is actually in your work with people?
Well, this is what informs it. So when I work with people, the outcome, when I work with people, it's usually for a year minimum. And sometimes, will go on for many, many years. So the idea is, usually the reason that people engage me or people I've trained is to bring forth the original contribution that they have for the world in all of its glory, right? And because I guess working with me is a fairly major commitment, it's like it's not playing around. We're gonna grab the Einstein with you and pull it out to the surface and fully enact it in the world. So, for example, this fellow here, Dr. Jan Bonhoeffer, he's been my client for 6 years, and I'll just give this a little case study. When I met him, he was accomplished. He was one of the most eminent experts in vaccine safety in the world, right? So he was working with the Bill and Melinda. I'm running out of eloquence here. He was working with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the CDC, the WHO on vaccine safety. right? So he wasn't promoting vaccines. He wasn't going like everybody must have vaccines. He was monitoring vaccines for their safety. He's a professor at the University Hospital in Basel and a practicing pediatrician. So initially I worked with him. We thought we were going to work around just getting his whole life flowing more smoothly. But within the first year of coaching, we discovered that there was a much deeper gift waiting to emerge from him than vaccine safety. Vaccine safety was operating within the existing system. Mm-hmm. He realized that there was actually an impulse within him to move beyond the existing system. So we, in the course of the coaching, we developed heart-based medicine, which is, you can now find it online, heartbasedmedicine.org. And he realized the real infectious disease that he had come to the planet to heal was not bacteria, viruses, but was, well, I should say viruses because vaccines apply to viruses. It wasn't viruses, but it was non-love. He had really come to the planet to help vaccinate us against the habits that inhibit love and to bring the heart back into medicine. So we've worked together for 5 or 6 years now. We co-authored this book, Dare to Care, which is about bringing the heart back into medicine. And now we're working on a second book, which is called The Proof for Love. So we're working with some of the most eminent professors of medicine around the world, Dr. James Doty at Stanford and Dr. Srini Pillai at Harvard. Peter Sullivan at Oxford. We're working with these fantastic people at the outer frontiers of medicine to explore what is beyond technology in medicine. Technology in medicine, like med tech, has advanced medicine in some ways, but has also depersonalized medicine. Mm-hmm. So you see what I mean? Like bringing technology into medicine, it's made diagnosis more accurate and microsurgery more accurate. But the original healer, if we go back a few hundred years, the shaman was healing through love and presence and mystery. So yes. It was a spiritual teacher and a healer at the same time. Same thing in Western society, that the healers were monks and priests, you see. So we've lost this element through fairly recently, through the dominance of empirical science. We've lost this element of love and trust and invoking divine energy. And so Dr. Jan Bonhoeffer, not in a woo-woo new agey way, but in a very scientific way, we're bringing the heart back into medicine. Now, so you were asking, how does it work? Generally speaking, I mean, he's very fluent in the brilliant cycle, but we're using the brilliant cycle to midwife this incredible gift. So I work with people who have the intuition, the sense that there is something really wanting to push through me, like a blade of grass pushing through the concrete. There is some gift that I know I was born to bring into this world, and I can't quite seem to get around it, and I need some help. And then I midwife them, but they need to understand that this is going to require significant changes of lifestyle. They may be getting up at different times than they used to. They may be sleeping differently. They may be taking different supplements. They may have to change their diet. They're going to have to make all kinds of changes to put this gift of unique contribution central on their altar. They may have to throw off all the bric-a-brac that has been put on their altar in terms of success and, fame and indulgence and all kinds of things, and just put this one sacred deity of contribution, like being danced by the music of the unheard music of the divine, to be danced by this, or to be danced so thoroughly into existence that it becomes a powerful disruption in their industry. So that's what I do. I help people do that.
Wow. And you have such an infectious passion about that.
It's the drug.
I know you also work with organizations. So is the application, how do you apply this the radical brilliance model in organizations when you have lots of people?
Yeah, there are two ways. It's not lots of people, by the way. It works. It works probably with like 24 or less. So if I have done work in some very big organizations, Silicon Valley organizations, but it was with a team, not with the whole company.
Okay.
Right.
Yep. So a team was ideal.
Yeah. So there are two ways you can do that. One is you can teach everybody in the team to respect the cycle in their own life, but also you can recognize that a team of people can become brilliant by representing different parts of the cycle. Now, it doesn't mean that we indulge in looping. Everybody needs to go through the whole cycle every day. But when they do that, some people may emerge as, although they're going through the whole cycle, they may emerge as the keepers, the stewards of 3 to 6. In other words, they may be the people in the team who really hold accountability and timelines, and they operate the kind of what's it called now, that app that people use for accountability.
Oh, like Trello or something.
Yeah, but I was thinking of the other one, Slack.
Slack.
So maybe some people are going to like operate Slack, and so they're the accountability holders. Some people may be doing 6 to 9. They may be the ones saying, hey, this is great, we're doing all this, let's sit down together, let's take a breath, let's look at where we're making mistakes. So they may be the stewards of having a little humility and not getting too carried away. Some people on the team may be the 9 to 12, and they may be reminding each other there's something bigger at work here. There's not too much of that goes on in corporations, but there's something bigger at work here. Let's except kind of religious organizations, but let's just invoke the presence of something bigger than just our minds. And some people may be geniuses at 12 to 3, and they may be the ones who inject new ideas, and they're the innovators. So everybody needs to go through the whole cycle, but some people may be stewards of certain parts of the cycle over others.
And so an ideal team would be like you have someone who prefers each, as a steward of each part of the cycle.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, well, let's. I know you've so thoroughly thought about this because this is your thing, and I'm sure you can keep putting more connections into place. But I'll just, if there's an important part we haven't covered or something I haven't asked you about that you want to mention, this is a good time to talk about that.
Well, I think it's perhaps the thing that we forget, the thing that we each forget most of the time is just how pivotal a time this is. This is a make or break time. And there is legitimate indicators that we may destroy ourselves and many other species along with us. This next 30 years could be the period of mass extinction. We're capable of doing that, whether it's through just overconsumption or nuclear weapons. We are capable of right now of destroying ourselves. And there are elements in human nature that will do that. There are elements in human nature that are just so intent upon power and greed that we're capable of doing that. And if that happens, it's not the end of the world. It's the end of human society, but it's not the end of the planet. Everybody knows that the planet will recover. I mean, probably the planet will recover quite a bit in a few decades, but probably every last remnant of human civilization would be eroded in maybe 1,000 years. Even the most resilient things we've created out of, graphite or something will eventually be eroded, Mm-hmm. So if we make ourselves extinct, we will become just like the dinosaurs. They came and they went. But this could also be an opportunity for a dramatic upgrade where we flourish, where we actually discover our potential, and where human life is no longer predominantly about suffering and inequality and cruelty, but we become co-creators, and we live in joy and creativity, and we live with frugality but gratitude. And really that flip, that choice, if we're going to self-destruct or evolve, that choice is by its very nature decentralized. It's not up to leaders. It's not Donald Trump or Joe Biden, or for that matter, Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg who will make that decision. It's you and me. It's you and me and you 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 and they and they and they and they. It's all of us. If we support each other and remind each other and inspire each other to learn, well, to really embody all of this cycle, to have moments of transcendence, moments of, as you said, where you can allow brilliance to flow through you. If you allow yourself to develop habits of accountability where you do what you said you would do and you keep your word, if you are willing to learn from mistakes with humility, if you activate all of these qualities with discipline, you will become part of the solution, and we will collectively evolve to a higher expression of humanity, which may no longer be Homo sapiens. It may be Homo illuminatus, a new kind of human. And it might be a bit of both. Maybe, who knows, maybe, 90% of the people alive today will flounder, unfortunately, and maybe a small percentage will evolve together into a higher expression. We don't know. But there doesn't seem to be logically much middle ground. Like, to carry on the way that we have been, futurists like Peter Russell, used to be Barbara Marx Hubbard, people who really think about the future, there's no logical way, for example, that fiat currencies could last much longer. It's not possible. The national debt in America, it means that the American economy, it's like somebody who has $300,000 of credit card debt and a $60,000 income. That person is going bankrupt. You can't imagine how $60,000 a year income and maybe even $80,000 a year overhead and a $300,000 credit card debt, the end is nigh. You know what I mean? Like there is no possible way to imagine your way out of that. You're going down, right? So the American economy, I'm sorry, but it's impossible to imagine how the GDP could ever pay off the national debt. It's impossible. It is impossible, right? So, I mean, the system as we have it, it's a zero-sum game. It's going to collapse. The fiat currencies we have, including usury, including the entire banking system, everything, it's going down, right? It's inevitably going down. Now, and all of the kind of power structures that allow for that allow people with a lot of money to invest in founders who create this big organization, like the days of Facebook and Uber and Microsoft and Apple, it's over. We can't keep doing that, creating these structures where massive numbers of people utilize a system that was financed by a rich elite, and the rich just keep getting richer. It's not possible. It's not sustainable. So we are going to see new systems evolving. This is where we started out. And whoever is willing to upgrade their consciousness to participate in those new systems will thrive. Whoever holds on to the old systems is going to have a very rough ride, and maybe we don't know. We just don't know how much this is going to affect us physically. I mean, the thing is, like with COVID didn't just happen out of the blue. The medical system around the world was already completely fractured, particularly in America. Mm-hmm. The medical system had really just become an opportunity for opportunism, for greed. The American system in America was already completely broken. So you throw something like COVID at the medical system we have, and it just exposes the weaknesses in the system. right? So countries with nationalized medicine were able to get through COVID more easily, right? So South Korea, for example, it was not nearly so devastating. So in the same way, when you get very broken systems, they sort of limp along until you throw something like COVID at them, and then they collapse. Mm-hmm. And that's probably what's going to continue happening. We've got these broken systems, and then you throw something at it, like an earthquake or or something unexpected. But the system is not. The system was so run by immediate opportunism that the system didn't have built into it saving up for a rainy day, and then the system collapses. You see, mm-hmm. So this is a pivotal time. I think this is the conclusion that we want to come to, is this is a super pivotal time. It's like really how you spend your day to day, the conversations you have today, the way that you invest your time and your money today is absolutely pivotal to whether or not your future, your children and your grandchildren have a future. Really every decision we make now is pivotal. And you've got to take this with a little bit of relaxation. I mean, we're all going to die anyway. No, you're all going to die. We're going to die anyway. So your death is anyway going to happen, right? So it's not like we're going to somehow overcome death. It's just a matter of, are we going to live intelligently so this miracle of human life can continue for many generations? Or are we just going to blow it in some all-out binge party now where there aren't any future generations? Those are the choices. And I'm choosing sustainability in every way that I can. I'm choosing to spend the rest of my life supporting other people in sustainability. And if enough people make that choice, we'll have a sustainable future. If they don't, we won't. And boom, that's it. But, I want to just encourage whoever's sat with us this long, God bless you, to think about maybe doing your descendants a favor and maybe exercising a little restraint and sobriety today so that your great-grandchildren can wake up and drink clean water and breathe clean air and enjoy an equitable, just society.
Another perfect mic drop moment. You tied that up so nicely, and I'm totally on board with what you're saying.
Great, man. Yeah.
And it can feel like a responsibility, right? Every decision, oh my gosh. But each decision, right, creates a fork of possible outcomes, and you might as well consider it thoroughly. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, sorry, just throwing one last thing. It's a really, really big place for gratitude and all this. If you can really institute not only thinking thoughts of gratitude and appreciation, but speaking them as well, the more that you amplify gratitude in your life, the more that your greed to consume will relax.
Yeah, fantastic. And that brings me back to, you wrote the foreword for my guest that I talked to yesterday, Jason Diggs, Conflict Equals Energy. And, he's talking about just fueling your relationships with verbalized appreciation.
Yeah.
How that, sets up so many things. So totally on board with that. And
right.
Arjuna, this is, I really appreciated, that it flowed and we were able to riff on, what we wanted to, and also get to talking about this important model, your work that you've done. And just really grateful for your time and your insight and your wisdom and experience. So thank you.
My pleasure, brother. Thank you.